Who are you clapping for? Wow. Hey, good morning, Portsmouth Abbey. My name is Colonel Bryndol and I teach math here. It is my honor to join you in recognizing Veterans Day this year. I am a veteran. I'm here with Mr. Hobbins, a Vietnam veteran. I'm here with Karl Jackson, the son of a veteran, to give some perspective on this day. Veterans Day is November 11th. This recognition of our veterans has a long tradition that dates back to World War I. You probably know that the number 11 has some significance. At the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month in 1918, after 4 years of gruesome fighting, World War I finally came to an end. In all, the human toll was some 38 million lives lost. For the United States, it was 116 killed in action. At that time, President Woodrow Wilson set the wheels in motion. A little later, our nation set aside November 11th, a day to honor all of our military members, past and present, those who served in war and in peace. Like other federal holidays, these special days on our calendar sometimes devolve to just a day off, or maybe a great deal to buy a car, or maybe even a new mattress. I hope that Veterans Day might mean something just a little bit more to you, and I know that it does. I had the good fortune to speak to you last year, and my message was simple. Find a veteran and thank them for their service. During that talk last year, I asked those with connections to military to stand. And if you were around last year, you might remember, I would say about half the audience was standing after all of the roll call. That impressed me, and this community impresses me. This year, my message is to remember a fallen veteran. We don't have far to look. They're in the headlines way too often. Just last Saturday, Sergeant First Class Stephen Cribben died in Afghanistan. He was 33 years old, a Green Beret from Wyoming. So far, he is the 13th service member to pay the ultimate sacrifice in Afghanistan. As if there were some perverse race to keep pace, our operations in Iraq this year have also cost the lives of 13 Americans. And this has come close to home. No one wants to be that Gold Star family. But unfortunately, even here at the Abbey, this is a term that describes some of you. The work of our military is inherently dangerous, sometimes more rewarding than other times, sometimes more frustrating than other times. We've had really lousy days. We've had super days. Like first impressions, sometimes those last impressions are the ones that stick for veterans and defines their perspective as they look back on their services. While I don't dare to speak for all veterans, I thought that I might say something general about veterans and something specific about some that I knew. I hope the general comments might help you understand why veterans are the way that they are, and I hope the specific comments might help you remember a veteran. About veterans. We look fondly on the team we once had. Teammates, trust, mission first, soldiers always. Do your job. Being in the game, on the field, is where we wanted to be. Part of the action. Off the team feels empty. Mistakes have consequences. Letting down your brothers or sisters in arms. A constant struggle. Guilt for leaving family. Guilt for not being over there in the fight. We spoke a unique language, some phrases and some acronyms. Some words are our ethos. Harder right over the easier wrong. Never quit. Never leave a fallen comrade. And one fitting for today's message, never forget. We had some acronyms. Some that's in the news today. On the radio this morning, BCD, bad conduct discharge. That's the label of the shooter in Texas. In the defense, FPF, final protective fires. On patrol, SILs, stop, look, listen, and smell. Solely to get an advantage on someone who's trying to shoot you so that you can shoot them. There are a lot of other acronyms that end with the three letters IED. Who would ever thought? SVIED? Suicide vest, IED. VBIED. Vehicle borne, IED. I have to tell you that we also look fondly on the opportunities that we had. We always had opportunities to rise through the ranks, from private all the way to general if we wanted to strive that far. In this hierarchy, everyone had the chance to lead, a chance to advance, an obligation to step up when the commander went down. Because who's in charge? You are. The great thing about this was before you were placed in charge, you had a role model to watch. He or she could be a positive role model that you wish to emulate. Or that person could be the example of what you absolutely did not want to be. Either way, the military offered a path for advancement, a route to promotion, a career, unhindered by obstacles set by personality or bias. In my own memory of the time I was in the service, it was always a meritocracy. That's a good type of organization to be part of. I told you I'd talk about veterans in general. Now I want to talk about specific veterans. And I think this will be the harder part for me to speak about. The first thing first, I personally can't recall being first often myself. It just didn't happen. But at West Point, I was one of the first. Believe it or not, one of the first to be forgotten. Like here at the Abbey, West Point had a program that connects students with faculty, something like your system of advisors. Anyways, I was one of the forgotten, about 200 in my class that never were assigned an advisor. Eventually, I met my advisor near the end of my sophomore year. So I went through, if you can imagine, your first 2 years without an advisor. I went through my first 2 years at West Point without that sort of mentor, someone to look after me, feed me, make me smile when I was down. This particular person was my economics professor, an Army officer, a brilliant Harvard MBA, a warrior scholar. Sometimes I wondered, how did the Army ever recruit such talent? He was all that I thought one could be. Anyways, he and his wife would have several of us over to their house, fill us with food, offer to us a home away from home. That was my first glimpse of the active duty Army family. This included meeting their kids, a couple boys and a little 6-year-old named Laura, who could only stare at the 10 or so of us college students who were sitting in her living room. She was nearly paralyzed by her wonder of these kids in her living room and maybe her shyness. Being the first can be a bad thing. I knew a few who were first to die. Google has made it easy to find their names. The 13th to die this year, or the 5,000th to die in that war, does not quite carry the headline of being the first. And I happen to have known a few of the first. The first West Pointer killed in Desert Storm was my friend, First Lieutenant Tommy Bates. He and I were in the same organization at West Point. Tommy did everything on the stage. This would have been his home. He was an entertainer, a performer, and he was a roadie. He was from Cranston, Rhode Island. He died in a rollover accident in Kuwait when he was just 27. The first West Pointer killed in Desert Storm. So that was the follow-on to Desert Shield. That's when we actually went into Iraq. He was my friend, First Lieutenant Donnie Tiller. Donnie had a way of making you laugh. Donnie was an Army brat. When his parents dropped him off to start at West Point, they didn't have very far to go because he lived on post. They dropped him off a few blocks away from his own house. He flew the first helicopter to be shot down. Sorry. First helicopter shot down in Iraq. The first woman West Pointer killed in the global war on terror. That was First Lieutenant Walker. If you Google her, you'll find her face. She was just 24, engaged to be married to a man who would eventually work for me, killed by an IED doing route clearance in Afghanistan. Her first name was Laura. She was that little girl that I met at my advisor's house. The first graduate of Georgetown to die was First Lieutenant Robert Riley. Robert was like Laura. Both died far off lands, killed by roadside bombs. Both were just 24. His remains were recovered. He was buried in New York, not far from West Point. But his name is etched in stone, a shiny black wall in Washington, D.C. You see, Robert died in Vietnam, a Green Beret, an advisor like those we have today in Niger. He was the first Georgetown graduate to be killed in Vietnam. You'll see that on their website. They recognize that. A little closer to home, Roberts High School just celebrated their 60th reunion. Anyone know where that might have been? Yeah, it was right here. Robert's 60th reunion was celebrated just a few weeks ago right here. You see, Robert was our first graduate to die in Vietnam. If you look at your program and look at the back, that's Robert. So he was a paratrooper. He was actually in the Screaming Eagles, 101st Airborne Division. Same unit that Cliff was in, but a little bit earlier than Cliff's time. Georgetown recognizes him as their first graduate killed in Vietnam. Take a look at his picture. Imagine what he was and who he might have been. Like 16 others, Robert's name is also carved in stone at another location, and it happens to be at the back of our church. I don't know if anyone noticed that, but all of their names are carved in stone at the back of our church. So I'll close here. I'm sorry I got a little emotional. It sometimes upsets people when they think about these things. Please think of Robert and the 16 others every once in a while. And please never forget. I'm done. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. I want to start in maybe an odd way. Let's go 20 years ago. It's Washington, D.C. It's a June evening. And one of the real colorful characters of the United States Senate, Strom Thurmond from South Carolina, who's almost 100 years old, in his white suit, orange hair, walks into one of these lobbyist receptions, and a cub reporter from the Washington Post watches this. The first thing the senator does is go to the buffet table and fill both pockets full of rolls. And the cub reporter is so shocked that he goes up to her and says, "Senator Thurman, a man of your prestige, doing what you just did." And Thurman put his arm around the boy and said, "Son, in this life, you just never know. You just never know." Don't forget that. When the colonel asked me to speak today, I could have gone down several different roads. And then all of a sudden the speech was written for me in the tragic events of the last 3 weeks. I'd first of all like to go back to one event where none of you had been born yet, or maybe some, I don't know. That's September 11th, 2001, the World Trade Center. And what I want to focus on this morning is not the event, not all the people running out, but I want to focus on the firemen who were going up into those buildings. See, they were going up. Everyone else is going out. I've never forgotten that. And then about 2-3 weeks ago, this horrific shooting in Las Vegas. The next morning, I'm watching Fox News, and the film clip is bizarre. It's these young police officers going into that hotel, and you can hear the machine gun fire coming out. Whoa, that blew me away. They're going in, and you can hear the machine gun fire. And then, just last week, 26 people are massacred in a Baptist church in Texas. And out of a house runs a guy with a rifle and doesn't even have his shoes on and engages the lunatic. Wounds him, and then another good old boy is driving down the road, pulls up, the guy with the rifle says, "This is the guy who's just been shooting these," and they chase him. Wow. They chase him. So as Senator Thurman says, in this life, you just never know. I hope and pray that no one in this room ever has to do anything like that. I hope and pray, if you don't want to, that you don't serve in our armed services. But you'll be missing something. That's a whole nother speech. But, son, in this life, you just never know. And I know from being here with you every day, who can forget 4 years with Sisk? I mean, honest to God. But I know that when, and I hope they never happen, but you just never know, when those events occur, you will answer and do very well, not only for yourselves, but for everyone around you. Thank you very much.
A couple weeks ago, Dr. Sones asked me to do this talk and to speak from the perspective of someone whose father has served and for someone who wants to serve in the future, and I will. But first, I need to start with one kind of caveat. My experience with the military and being a military kid pales in comparison to some of others. others who have spent literally years and years of their lives without their mothers or without their fathers, and who move from year to year as their parents' post changes from year to year. I can't pretend to understand what those kids and what those families go through, and I'm not going to try to. But I was asked to give my thoughts on the matter, and I hope I can do it justice. My experience with the military began before I was born, when my dad was commissioned into the Army in 1992. After his mandatory 4 years from ROTC, he moved into the reserves and remained there for the next 14 years. In the interim, I was born, Ian was born, Thais was born. We grew up without much incident. We moved twice, and really once that I can remember. But in 2011, during the surge in Afghanistan, when we sent a lot of guys over there, his reserve unit called him up and told him he was going to be deployed. And in a couple weeks that passed by in a blur, he was in Kabul. I mean, the next 9 months kind of passed really without incident. I mean, watching the news hurt. But after a while, in 2012, he came home, and though it seems like a blink of an eye in retrospect, that year dragged on for eternity and at the time. And it's taught me many things. But first and foremost, it's given me a glimpse into the realities of service and of sacrifice in the military. What those who serve do is not simply go to work like a normal job. Instead, they answer a call higher than themselves to protect and to serve the United States of America. They leave everything that is dear to them, friends, family, leisure, so that other people who they don't know, both at home and abroad, may be able to enjoy the freedoms which we have provided for them. And it's really, really, really hard. And some of them might not even be able to enjoy the freedoms for which they fought. But they do it anyway, because their nation calls them to do so, and because they are willing to sacrifice their needs for the needs of others. And that idea, that notion of service and sacrifice, has had an enormous impact on me, but that's not really my point. My point is that on all days, and on Veterans Day in particular, we ought to, at the very least, appreciate the sacrifices that veterans make and have made in the past in every aspect of our lives, quite frankly. They gave so that we and others could have, and for that and all they do to protect us every day, I would like to end with a simple thank you to all that have, do, and will serve this great country. Thank you.
These are the names of Portsmouth Abbey graduates who have been killed in the line of action. World War II, Alan Duffy, Pierre Erhard, Robert Sullivan, Alvin Burden, Edward Leahy, Edmund Roche, Charles Lathrop, David O'Brien, Richard Combs, Reginald Dusac, Thomas Foley, Robert Glennon, Edmund Garlesh. The Korean conflict, Thomas Price, Thomas Hubbard, Bruce O'Brien. The Vietnam War, Robert Riley.